Hej och välkomna tillbaka. Vi ska fortsätta programmet och nu går vi in i slutspurten. Vi har sista bolaget för idag. Vi ska flytta oss över Atlanten och lyssna på Saniona som presenterar från USA.
Thank you and hello everybody. So I'm Rami Levine. I'm the CEO of Saniona and I wanted to walk you through some of the recent developments, an update on the company and obviously open up for questions at the end. So I'll start by saying this is our executive team, and for those who have been following Saniona, you may have seen our press release just from about a week and a half ago, where we announced the expansion of our executive team, and you can see the team here with the expansion of three new hires to the executive team, from a new CFO to a new head of communications and a new head of HR. A bit about the company. We are a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on rare diseases, really primarily to meet unmet medical need. Our most advanced asset in clinical development, I should also say in late stage clinical development, is a product called Tesamet, which we are developing for two rare eating disorders. The first one is hypothalamic obesity, and the second one is Prader-Willi Syndrome. In hypothalamic obesity, we just released our phase 2 results back at the end of April. The results were positive, which means we are now heading towards a registration trial. We are in discussions over the next few months with the authorities, with the FDA, to align on the design of the clinical trial with the goal of initiating our phase 3 clinical trial probably in Q1 next year. Our second indication, Prader-Willi Syndrome, we have met with the FDA back in May to align on what that design will be. Our goal is to initiate a pivotal registration trial either end of this year or early next year. So in essence, we are moving into two registrational trials, both for Prader-Willi Syndrome and hypothalamic obesity, either end of this year or early next year. One of the unique things about Saniona is not only do we have a product in late-stage clinical development, which has the potential to become the first ever approved treatment in both hypothalamic obesity and Prader-Willi syndrome, but we also have a unique drug discovery platform. And what that drug discovery platform will do moving forward is it will fuel our future portfolio of products. Our most advanced assets in preclinical are a product called SAN711, which we are developing for rare neuropathic itching disorders. And the second one is SAN903, which we are developing for rare inflammatory disorders. SAN711 is basically ready to go into phase 1 clinical development, and we are now working to advancing it into phase 1. SAN903 is probably about a year behind SAN711 with the intent to advance that into phase 1 as well. One of the advantages of having a drug discovery platform is that as part of the research, we will identify molecules that are maybe more suitable for rare diseases. We have the full intent in those cases to develop those products ourselves and ultimately commercialize them. But we will be identifying molecules that are maybe more suitable for larger indications. And in those cases, we most likely will out-license them to larger companies for them to develop and ultimately commercialize, with the goal of getting milestone payments throughout the development and royalties once the product reaches the market. And we actually have that model already working in practice, and we have 3 examples of that actually taking place. We out-licensed a molecule called tesofensine that we developed or found in our labs. We out-licensed that to a company called Medix. Medix have obesity clinics both in Argentina and Mexico, and we out-licensed tesofensine to them for obesity. They conducted a phase 3 last year and submitted the product for approval in December in Mexico. We are still waiting for the authorities to approve, which is still expected at the end of the year. Despite COVID, we haven't heard anything different, and for now, we're still anticipating an approval during this second half of the year. Once the product is approved, Saniona will be getting royalties from Medix, and Medix will then go and do the exact same thing in Argentina. We also out-license a product to Cadent Therapeutics, CAD 1883, which they are developing for essential tremor and ataxia. And under the agreement, we have shares in the company, and we will be getting royalties once the product is approved on the market in either of those two indications. And last but not least, we out-license 2 molecules to Boehringer Ingelheim for their schizophrenia program. And under that agreement, we will be getting both milestone payments throughout the development as well as royalties once either of these 2 products reaches the market. We have we are a publicly traded company in Sweden. We are our main presence is in Copenhagen, but one of our declared goals is to build out our presence in the U.S. And we have started to do so with the executive team and the teams underneath. Primarily, the functions that we're building out right now are the clinical development, the regulatory, the finance, etc. So our presence in the U.S. is definitely increasing. And last but not least, for those who may have not been following Saniona, we just completed in early August a raise of $65 million US. And really the goal of that was a transformational deal for us, as many of you can probably imagine, because it really allows us for the first time to focus on building and growing the company, which we are very excited about. Those proceeds will go to pretty much everything that I listed earlier, from advancing Tesomet all the way to registration, to advancing our earlier preclinical work into phase 1, and to building the organization here in the US. On top of the $65 million in itself, we're extremely excited to have been able to attract some of the most respected healthcare institutional investors here in the US to believe in our story, to believe in the company, and to invest $65 million in us. If I move forward and really focus most of my presentation on Tesomet, which obviously is the most advanced product in clinical development that we have. Tesomet is a triple monoamine reuptake inhibitor that controls eating, which is exactly what you want to do in these 2 rare disease indications. And the way it does that is by giving Tesomet, you increase the levels of dopamine, serotonin, and noradrenaline in the brain, which are the 3 monoamines that affect the reward center and the appetite center in the brain, which is exactly what you need to be able to address the key symptoms of both of these rare diseases. By increasing those 3 monoamines, what you do is you basically reduce the craving for food, you reduce the appetite, and you increase metabolic fat burn, which ultimately controls both hyperphagia and weight loss, which you see in Prader-Willi Syndrome, and controls the weight loss that you want to see in hypothalamic obesity. So if we dig a bit deeper into the different indications, and we'll start with hypothalamic obesity. Hypothalamic obesity is a rare disease, obviously. The prevalence is about 1 in 50 to 100,000 patients, which means in the US there are about 34 to 6,800 patients, and in Europe about 5,500 to 11,000 patients. The cause of hypothalamic obesity is an injury to the hypothalamus. Typically, it's a result of a rare brain cancer, and as a result of the attempt to remove that, it causes an injury to the hypothalamus, which ultimately results in a very quick increase in weight, which results in obesity. Some of the disease characteristics of hypothalamic obesity are post-surgical obesity, as I just mentioned, hyperphagia, and this constant desire to eat, memory impairment, attention deficit, and as you can imagine, these were in most cases healthy people. Some of them may extremely active, and as a result of the brain tumor and the removal of the brain tumor, their weight increased quite dramatically, and as a result that causes depression in some cases, and also suicide in others. We conducted a phase 2 study. It was a 24-week double-blind placebo-controlled study. And after 24 weeks, all patients were offered to continue for an extra 24 weeks. The placebo group was then offered to go on active therapy for another 24 weeks. We reported the blinded phase of the trial. All patients, or all the patients who continued, which was 18 out of the 21, continued to the open label phase. And of that open label phase, at least 10 have already completed that open label phase. And we anticipate the full results of that open label phase later on in Q4 this year. The primary endpoint of the study was safety and tolerability, typical to a phase 2 study. But when you look at the list of secondary endpoints, there were primarily all efficacy-related endpoints. And the first one, the change in body weight from baseline, not only was the main secondary endpoint, that will be our main primary endpoint going into our phase 3 pivotal trial. This is a bit of an eyesore with with the table and all the numbers, but at a high level, I will say Tesamet was found to be safe and well tolerated. The most common adverse events included sleep problems, dry mouth, and headache, which are common both for tesofensine and metoprolol. There was a single case of Tesamet-related anxiety reported as a severe adverse event, but as soon as the patient got off treatment, they did much better. This patient specifically had 5-year history of anxiety going into the trial. So in a way, it was expected, but again, it was resolved as soon as the patient discontinued treatment. Apart from that, there were no significant or clinically meaningful differences in heart rate or blood pressure between the treatment group and the placebo group. And we're looking at the efficacy and the main secondary endpoint, the most important efficacy, which is change in body weight. What we could see is a substantial, significant, and clinically meaningful difference in body weight. In blue, you can see the placebo group, and in red, you can see the treatment arm of Tesamet. And you can see the decline in body weight, where you could start seeing a significant difference from week 12, which continued all the way up to the end of the study in week 24, a 6.28%. Which was not only statistically significant, but also clinically meaningful. So this was, of course, extremely encouraging in moving forward in the clinical development. When we compare the results that we saw in the body weight loss to how the FDA today looks at weight management, there are very clear guidelines by the FDA on how to manage weight loss. And there are 3 criteria that every product will have to meet in order to ultimately get an approval. The first one is to be able to show a significant difference with a difference of over 5% in body weight. And of course, with Tesamet, we showed a significant difference of 0.046 p-value. And of course, it was 61.5% of the patients. So we achieved the first goal or the criteria of the FDA. The second criteria of the FDA is that at least 35% of the patients in the active treatment have to have more than 5% or equal to 5% body weight loss from baseline. And that was achieved because we achieved 61.5% reduction. So with Tesamet, we achieved the second criteria as well. And then the last criteria is that the proportion of patients that had over 5% body weight loss has to be more than twice that of the placebo group. And that was the case for Tesamet as well. We were nearly 5 times better than the placebo group. So we achieved the third criteria as well. So this is obviously very encouraging because already now, based on the phase 2, we were able to show that Tesamet achieves and meets the 3 criteria that the FDA has put forward for body weight management. And what you can see at the bottom is on the left, the 2 bars, the red and the blue on the left, you can see the patients who had equal or greater than 5% reduction in body weight loss. In red is the Tesamet, and blue is the placebo, and you can see 62% of the Tesamet patients had a body weight reduction of more than 5% versus only 13% in the placebo. We took it even one step further and explored how many patients have more than 10% body weight loss, and you could see 38% of the Testament group versus none in the placebo group had a body weight loss of more than 10%. So, of course, extremely encouraging. The only reason for that, the more than 10% was not significant, is because there were zero in the placebo group. So it's hard. It's hard to do a p-value versus zero. Last but not least, we looked at change in HbA1c from baseline to week 24. And this is an important parameter. And what we saw here, when you look at the total reduction in hemoglobin, when you compare placebo to the treatment group, it was 12.2%. But much more importantly, we looked at the patients that had the diabetic patients, which in this study, 2 of those patients were actually on the treatment group. And what you want to be able to show is a reduction in those patients specifically. So you want to make sure that there's a decrease there. And what we were able to show is that when you only look at the patients who are diabetic, we could actually see nearly a 50% reduction. Last but not least, as I mentioned, we are in discussions with the FDA to prepare for our pivotal trial, our registration trial, which we intend to initiate early next year. The design of the phase 3 trial will be a 9-month double-blind placebo-controlled study with 2 doses, a 0.25 and a 0.5 versus placebo. After 9 months, all patients will be offered to go up to or down to the highest tolerated dose in an open-label extension of an extra 6 months, and that is being discussed with the FDA to get their approval for. I do want to briefly touch on Prader-Willi syndrome. Prader-Willi syndrome is another rare disease, obviously, that we are exploring. It's a slightly more common, but just ever so slightly, than hypothalamic obesity. There are about 8,000 to 11,000 patients in the US and about 13,000 to 8,000 patients in Europe. This is a genetic disease, unlike hypothalamic obesity, which was a result of an injury to the hypothalamus. PWS is a genetic disease, and some of the characteristics are hyperphagia, which typically is the main primary endpoint that we look at in clinical trials, which is this constant desire nonstop to eat. These patients have a short life expectancy, typically between 30 to 40 years old. They have intellectual disability, physical deficiencies, and behavioral problems. So very different characteristic to the hypothalamic obesity patients. Here as well, we conducted a phase 2A. The first part of the study was a 3-month study in adults, which you can see on the left, where we compared 0.5 milligram to placebo. Once that study was completed, we initiated another phase 2 study in adolescents, where we compared a lower dose, 0.125 to placebo. Then we continued that to an open label extension of another 3 months. And then we increased the dose from 0.125 to 0.25 for another 3 months after that. If you look at the results on the left, that's the adults. And here we look at the primary endpoint, which is hyperphagia. And you can see quite a substantial difference at the end of the 3 months study between placebo, which is in purple, and Testament, which is in light blue. Hyperphagia went all the way down to 0, which is really unheard of. The only challenge we had here is that we had patients who dropped out. There were 6 patients on treatment, and that dropped to 2. On placebo, there were 3, and that dropped to 2. And the main reason for that dropout was an increase in pre-existing CNS conditions that resulted as a result of the treatment. Those included, some skin picking, agitation, irritability. And the reason for that was because the PK value, the blood levels, the amount of Testament in the blood was about 4 times what we anticipated it to be. For that reason, when we went into the second part of the study, which was the adolescents, younger children, we preferred to go on the side of caution, and we actually reduced the dose by 4 to compensate for that high blood level of Tesomet that we saw in the adults. That's the reason why when we started the adults, and you can the adolescents that you can see on the right, we started at a dose of 0.125, which is a fourth of 0.5. Unfortunately, when you see the first part, which is the left panel of the graph on the right, there was no statistical significance between the placebo group and the treatment group, which basically means we went to too low of a dose. And therefore, when we went to the second part, the middle panel, which was the extended phase, and we put everyone in the 0.125, we really didn't see a difference either. Only when we move to the higher dose, which you can see on the right panel of the right graph, you can start to see quite a substantial decline in hyperphagia. To complement that, we also looked at body weight loss. And here you can see on the left panel, the white is the adults. And just like we saw with the hyperphagia, the reduction in body weight loss was quite substantial in the adults using the 0.5 milligrams, basically reduction of minus 5.6%. In the middle panel is the adolescents, the placebo control phase of the adolescents. And just like we didn't see a statistical difference in hyperphagia, we didn't see a difference in the body weight loss in adolescents either. In fact, what we do see here is that both the placebo group and the Tesomet group increased body weight loss, which actually is expected because these are young children who grow up anyway. So they grow in height and they grow in width, and therefore it's to be expected. But if you look at the right panel, then you can actually, and that's when we increase the dose to 0.25, then you can see a body weight loss in the treatment group. Last but not least, moving forward, we are planning to initiate a phase 2b pivotal trial. So this will be a registration trial. It will be a 16-week double-blind placebo control with 3 treatment arms, 0.125, 0.25, and 0.375 versus placebo. After 16-week blinded phase, there will be an extension of 36-week open label phase where patients will be able to switch either up or down, which will give us a lot of insight into treatment behavior when you increase or decrease the dose. And in summary, I'll just say that following the recent raise of $65 million, we are well funded, which would take us all the way up to registration about 2.5 years from now. We are advancing all our clinical development, both in Prader-Willi Syndrome and hypothalamic obesity, into late-stage clinical development. We are moving our preclinical work, our SAN 711 and 903, into phase 1 clinical development. We are building, as we recently announced, we are building our organization in the US. We had our first round of hires, and there will be more to come. And last but not least, Tesomet does have the potential to become the first approved treatment in both hypothalamic obesity and Prader-Willi syndrome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rami. Very interesting presentation. Nice to have you for this presentation from the US. We have a couple of questions, and maybe we should start off with questions from the audience. And one question, which is, there are some speculations in Sweden regarding the selling of shares. I mean, you raised a lot of money from long-term investors, institutional investors, and now people are worried that they are already selling their shares. And do you have a comment, or have you talked to them?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. And I know there's concern, and I'm not sure we're concerned. I think we know what's happening, but we are disappointed. I will say that the main goal of the financing was primarily to bring institutional investors, and even more so, I would say, U.S. healthcare institutional investors who do this all the time, who understand what it takes to develop products, and are long-term investors. And we have done that and have done that successfully. In addition to the U.S. investors, we expanded the reach also into literally a handful of Scandinavian, what we thought were long-term investors. What we see today is that the U.S. investors are all still invested in Saniona. They are long-term investors. They don't have any plans of selling their shares. But disappointingly, what we saw is some of the AP funds, a couple to be specific, and AP2 to be even more specific, unfortunately, who we were told were long-term investors, and I think is the reputation that they have, which is exactly the reason we agreed to bring them onto this deal and tag on to the U.S. investors. What we see is that, or what we saw is that AP2 specifically have been selling their shares. Of course, that is disappointing. We saw that AP3 have sold some of their shares, not to the extent that AP2. But generally, the AP funds have been selling, which of course is a disappointment. That's not, why we brought them on board. Had we known, we wouldn't have brought the AP2 funds on board. AP4 have not been selling, to my knowledge. They were excited and followed the Saniona story for quite a while, and to my knowledge, they haven't been selling. So it really is primarily AP2 and to some extent AP3, and it is disappointing. But apart from that, everyone else is still engaged. I've been having conversations with many of them, and they're definitely still invested in the company.
Okay. Thank you for giving flavor on that, because it's
Sure.
it's a lot of speculations, I think.
Sure, I know.
We can move on to other questions from the audience. I think one is asking if you could elaborate a little bit about the sales potential for Tesomet.
Yeah, so I would say this. So the fact that we now finally have the money to advance, one of the things that we will be advancing, and that's why I'm not going to quite answer the question as I believe the investor who asked the question would like me to answer. But I will say is one of the things that we're investing now money in is to really have a much better analysis of the potential of Tesomet, both in hypothalamic obesity and Prader-Willi. Of course, there are many assumptions that would have to go into that, including market size, how many patients do we believe we'll be able to capture, how quickly, what's the price, and there are a lot of assumptions that will go into it. So we have, now that we have the money, have initiated a very thorough analysis to be able to have a much better understanding. We're also looking at potential expansion into new indications or other indications where Tesomet, we believe, could be beneficial in. So all that work will come together in an analysis that we're working on probably in a few more months. We'll have the results. And until we have those results, I prefer to refrain from just throwing out numbers.
Yeah, I understand. One more question regarding Tesomet. Are you planning to expand that to more organs, or what is your focus for that going forward?
Yeah, so of course the main focus right now is hypothalamic obesity and Prader-Willi syndrome. However, life cycle management is absolutely a key focus area for us. Life cycle management basically means exploring other indications that Tesomet potentially could work in, ranking them in priority based on a variety of different criteria on what is the third indication we'd want to pursue, potential fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. So that is part of the work that we are doing now. And when we have more clarity and we ultimately make decisions on other indications we would want to expand into, we will of course let the market know.
Yeah, I understand. Time is flying. We don't have more time, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And it was very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Goodbye, Rami.